There's something different about people who grew up in the 1960s. Perhaps it's the way they carry themselves through crises without falling apart. Maybe it's how they can navigate uncertainty with an almost eerie calm. Or perhaps it's that peculiar blend of optimism and pragmatism that seems hardwired into their very being. Because the 1960s didn't just shape a generation. It forged a specific type of psychological architecture that experts are only now beginning to understand. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll see why. Growing up in that decade created some of the most psychologically complex and resilient people walking the planet today. Let's start with something that shaped the 1960s childhood in ways most people never consider. Picture yourself as a 6-year-old. Every morning at school, you and your classmates practice something called duck and cover drills. The teacher blows a whistle, and you crawl under your desk, tucking your head between your knees, shielding yourself from an imaginary nuclear blast. For a child, this was truly terrifying. You didn't fully understand what nuclear war meant, but you understood enough. You knew that somewhere out there, people had weapons that could end everything, that the world your parents built for you could vanish in a flash of light, that the desk you were hiding under probably wouldn't save you from anything real. This wasn't trauma in the typical sense. It was something stranger. You learned to hold two contradictory truths simultaneously. The world might end tomorrow, and you still need to finish your homework tonight. There was a certain irony to it. Psychologists call this productive cognitive dissonance. But for kids in the 60s, these drills were just normal. Here's what's remarkable. Instead of creating a generation of anxious, paralyzed adults, this ambient awareness of an existential threat produced something unexpected. People who developed an unusual relationship with uncertainty. When you've practiced for the apocalypse before your 7th birthday, everyday problems lose some of their power to terrify you. Job loss? At least it's not nuclear annihilation. Relationship troubles? The world is still standing. This generation learned young that worrying about things beyond your control wastes precious energy. They developed what researchers now recognize as a sophisticated form of psychological triage, the ability to sort problems into things I can influence and things I need to accept. Not because they read about it in a self-help book, but because they absorbed it through their skin during those drills. Now, let's talk about something that happened on a Sunday night in February 1964. You're sitting in your living room. The whole family is gathered around the television set, and 4 young men from Liverpool appear on the Ed Sullivan Show. The screaming from the audience is so loud you can barely hear the music. Your older sister is crying, your parents look confused and slightly alarmed, but you're witnessing something you don't have words for yet. The birth of a cultural earthquake. The Beatles didn't just change music. They demonstrated to an entire generation that the world could transform overnight, that 4 regular guys could shake the foundations of culture, that what seemed permanent and fixed could become obsolete in the span of a single television broadcast. This was formative in ways that went far beyond haircuts and music preferences. Kids of the 60s learned early that change isn't something that happens slowly over generations. It can happen now. This created adults who aren't threatened by disruption the way other generations often are. They've seen entire cultural landscapes shift beneath their feet and survived. They know that what seems revolutionary today becomes normal tomorrow, and what seems permanent today might be gone by next year. But here's the psychological twist. While they witnessed radical change, they also lived through assassination after assassination. JFK, Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, all within 5 years. They watched their heroes get cut down, their hopes shattered on live television. They learned that progress isn't linear, that the good guys don't always win, that hope and tragedy are permanent roommates in the human experience. This combination, revolutionary optimism tempered by repeated loss, created a specific psychological profile. People who believe change is possible, but who aren't naive about the costs, who can hope without being foolish, who understand that fighting for something better doesn't guarantee you'll live to see it. This isn't cynicism. It's wisdom purchased at a very high price. Let's shift to something more intimate. Imagine you're 8 years old, and your mother hands you a few coins and sends you to the corner store alone. You walk there yourself, navigate the streets, choose what you want, hand over the money, count your change, and walk home. This wasn't a special privilege. This was just how things worked. Children in the 1960s handled real money from an early age. Not plastic cards that make numbers appear and disappear on screens, but actual coins that had weight in your pocket. Bills you could fold and unfold. You learned that money was finite because you could see it disappearing from your hand as you spent it. This physical relationship with currency created neural pathways that modern children simply don't develop. You understood cause and effect in a visceral way. Spend these coins on candy, and they're gone. Save them, and they accumulate. There was no abstract number on a screen to disconnect you from the reality of the transaction. What researchers now call financial executive function, the ability to delay gratification, plan for the future, and understand the true cost of purchases, was being built into these children through daily experience. They weren't learning about money, they were feeling it slip through their fingers or pile up in their piggy banks. And the independence didn't stop at the corner store. Picture this. It's 7:30 in the morning, and you're walking to school. You're 6, maybe 7 years old. There's no parent beside you, no adult watching from a distance. Just you, your books tucked under your arm, because backpacks haven't become common yet, and the route you've memorized through the neighborhood. You pass the house where the mean dog lives, and cross to the other side. You wave to Mrs. Patterson, who's always watering her garden. You meet up with the Thompson kids at the corner and walk the rest of the way together. This daily journey wasn't just transportation. It was an education. You learned to read your environment, to notice when something was different or wrong. You developed internal maps, not just of streets, but of social landscapes. Which adults were friendly, which houses to avoid, which routes were safe. Neuroscientists have discovered that this kind of autonomous navigation in childhood develops spatial reasoning, risk assessment, and self-reliance in ways that being driven everywhere simply cannot replicate. Your brain was literally being sculpted by independence every single morning before you even got to class. Now, let's talk about what happened when you got hurt. Because you did get hurt. You fell off your banana seat bicycle going down a hill too fast. You scraped your knees climbing trees. You burned yourself on a chemistry set that would never pass. Modern safety standards. You got hit in the face playing baseball without a helmet. And when you came home bleeding or bruised, your parents said something that would sound almost cruel by today's standards. You're fine. Go back outside. Your parents had faith in you. Faith that you could handle discomfort. Faith that you would learn from the experience. Faith that protecting you from every scrape and bruise would do you more harm than the injuries themselves. Psychologically, this created people who don't catastrophize pain, who understand that hurt and damaged are not the same thing, who can experience discomfort without believing something is fundamentally wrong. Burns, scratches, and scars weren't emergencies to be prevented at all costs. They were evidence of a life being lived. Modern psychology is finally catching up to what 1960s parents seemed to know instinctively. Children need to experience manageable adversity to develop what researchers call stress inoculation. Small doses of difficulty build psychological immunity, and 60s kids got plenty of small doses. But the risks weren't just physical. Consider this scenario. It's a Saturday afternoon, and you're in the living room with your father. The hood of the family car popped open in the driveway. He hands you a wrench and shows you how the engine works. Or maybe you're with your mother, learning to use the sewing machine, the needle dangerously close to your small fingers. Children in the 1960s were trusted with real tools, real responsibility, real consequences. The Easy Bake Oven wasn't just a toy, it was a genuine appliance that got hot enough to bake actual food. You could hurt yourself. That was the point. Learning to be careful around things that could hurt you was part of the education. This created adults who aren't intimidated by complexity, who assume they can figure out how things work, who don't automatically call an expert for every problem. They grew up taking things apart and putting them back together. They learned that most machines and most problems are less mysterious than they initially appear. Let's talk about waiting. Real waiting. The kind that modern humans have almost entirely forgotten how to do. You want to see a new movie? The theater downtown has 1 or 2 screens. Films rotate weekly or bi-weekly. You see what's playing, or you wait. There's no streaming, no on-demand, no "I'll just watch it later." If you miss it, you might never see it. You want to hear your favorite song? You sit by the radio hoping the DJ plays it. You can't skip to it. You can't download it. You wait. And when it finally comes on, you scramble to press record on the tape player, praying you don't miss the beginning. You want to know what happens next on your favorite TV show? You wait a week. The cliffhanger sits in your mind unresolved for 7 long days. There's no binge watching, no skipping ahead, just anticipation. This rhythm of wanting and waiting rewired the brains of an entire generation. They developed what psychologists call delay tolerance to an extraordinary degree. They know in their bones that good things are worth waiting for, that anticipation is its own pleasure, that not everything needs to be available immediately to be valuable. In a world of instant gratification, people who grew up in the 1960s carry this capacity for patience like a superpower. They don't panic when things take time. They don't need constant stimulation to feel content. They learned early that the spaces between getting what you want are not empty. They're full of something: imagination, anticipation, life. Now, picture a summer evening in 1965. The streetlights have just flickered on, which means you have maybe 10 more minutes before you need to be home. You're in somebody's backyard with 8 other kids from the neighborhood, finishing up a game of tag or baseball, or some hybrid game you invented that afternoon that has rules only you understand. There are no adults present, no one is supervising, no one is refereeing. When someone argues about whether they were tagged or not, you work it out yourselves. When feelings get hurt, you figure out how to move forward. When the younger kids can't keep up, you decide together whether to include them or tell them to go home. Every social challenge is yours to navigate. This daily practice in human relations created something remarkable. People who can read a room instantly, who sense tension before it surfaces, who understand that what people say and what they mean are often two different things. They became students of human behavior not because they studied it, but because their survival and social standing depended on understanding it. You learned whose house you could walk into without knocking, and whose parents required a formal greeting at the door. You learned which kids would tell on you, and which ones would keep secrets. You learned how to be part of a group while still maintaining your own identity. These weren't skills taught in any classroom. They were absorbed through thousands of hours of unsupervised social interaction, and they produced adults with what researchers call high social intelligence, the ability to navigate complex interpersonal dynamics with apparent effortlessness. But some experiences cut deeper than social learning. Consider what it was like to be a child on July 20th, 1969. You're sitting in front of the television, maybe at home, maybe in a school classroom, watching grainy footage of something impossible. A man in a bulky white suit is stepping onto the surface of the moon. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. You're watching the boundary of human possibility expand in real time. Everything your parents told you was impossible, everything the world said couldn't be done, is happening right before your eyes. If we can walk on the moon, what else might be possible? What limits are actually real? This moment imprinted something profound on an entire generation, a belief, not just intellectual but visceral, that even the most daunting challenges can be overcome, that human ingenuity and determination can achieve the unthinkable, that the phrase, "it can't be done," is often just a failure of imagination. When 60s kids grew up to face their own towering obstacles, they carried this with them. They'd seen the unachievable achieved. They'd watched humanity reach for the stars and actually touch them. That kind of moment doesn't fade. But that optimism existed alongside something darker. The 1960s were also the decade when evening news broadcasts began showing footage from Vietnam. Real war, real death, real bodies being carried through jungles. You'd be eating dinner, and the television would show things that children today are carefully shielded from. This exposure didn't traumatize them in the traditional sense, it educated them. They understood from a young age that the world contained genuine horror, that safety was not guaranteed, that adults didn't always make good decisions, that authority could be wrong, even catastrophically wrong. This created a generation with a complicated relationship to institutions. They respect competence, but not credentials. They follow leaders who earn trust, not those who simply demand it. They learned young that questioning authority isn't disrespectful. Sometimes it's necessary. And yet, despite everything, despite the assassinations and the war footage and the nuclear drills, despite watching their heroes fall and their hopes shatter, there's something almost defiant about the optimism of 60s kids, because they also remember the March on Washington. They remember the Civil Rights Act passing. They remember watching the world change because people believed it could and refused to accept that it couldn't. They hold both truths simultaneously. The world can be terrible, and the world can get better. Progress is possible, but not guaranteed. Hope is rational, but not naive. This psychological complexity, this ability to believe and doubt at the same time, might be their most valuable inheritance. Let's return to something more personal. Picture yourself on a Saturday morning. The television is showing cartoons. You watch for a few hours, but then something happens. The programming ends, the station signs off or switches to something boring. And you're faced with a choice. Sit in an empty house or go find something to do. So, you go outside, you walk to your friend's house and knock on their door. You explore the creek behind the neighborhood. You build something out of scrap wood. You lie in the grass and watch clouds. You get bored, and then you get creative. This cycle of boredom leading to invention happened over and over throughout 1960s childhoods. There was no infinite scroll, no endless content, no algorithm designed to capture and hold your attention. There was just time, empty time, waiting to be filled by whatever you could imagine. Neuroscientists have discovered that boredom activates the brain's default mode network, the regions responsible for creativity, self-reflection, and connecting dots others miss. Every time a 60s kid stared at a ceiling or wandered aimlessly through a summer afternoon, their brain was doing important work. They just didn't know it yet. These are adults who can sit in silence without discomfort, who don't need constant stimulation to feel okay, who can be alone with their thoughts because they've had so much practice at it. In an age of endless distraction, this capacity for stillness is becoming increasingly rare and all the more valuable. Now, consider what happened when something went wrong. You failed a test, you lost a game, you didn't get picked for the team. And here's what didn't happen. Nobody rushed in to fix your feelings. Nobody gave you a trophy for participating. Nobody pretended you had won when you'd clearly lost. You experienced the full weight of disappointment, embarrassment, or failure. And then something remarkable occurred. You survived it. The world didn't end. The feeling passed. And you learned something invaluable. You can handle more than you think you can. This wasn't cruelty dressed up as character building. It was reality. Sometimes you lose. Sometimes you fail. Sometimes things don't go your way. And there's nothing anyone can do about it except help you get back up. 60s kids got this lesson early and often. What psychologists now call frustration tolerance, the ability to experience setbacks without falling apart, was being built into them through countless small disappointments that no one tried to prevent or fix. They learned that failure contains information, that losing teaches you things winning never can, that resilience isn't the absence of struggle, but the capacity to keep going despite it. These people carry something the modern world desperately needs. They remember what it felt like to be trusted, to be left alone, to figure things out without someone watching over their shoulder. They remember when childhood was a little dangerous and a lot free. They're living proof that resilience isn't something you're born with. It's something you build. That competence comes from practice, not protection. That the best gift you can give someone isn't a smooth path, but the confidence to handle whatever is thrown at them. In a world of growing anxiety and fragility, they stand as evidence of another way. Not a perfect way, not a way without costs, but a way that produced people who can weather storms, adapt to change, and maintain hope even when hope seems naive. They grew up in a decade of assassinations and moon landings, of cultural earthquakes and nuclear fears, of unprecedented freedom and unimaginable loss. And somehow, maybe because of all of it, they learned to hold it all. The hope and the horror, the joy and the grief, the certainty that things can get better, and the knowledge that they might not. That's the psychology of people who grew up in the 1960s, and it's a psychology we might all benefit from understanding a little better. See you in the next video.